Audible. I hope everyone can hear me. Welcome to the second session, which is termed Health and Overall Well-being. I am going to be your facilitator, Candice Chirwa, and I am also affectionately known as the Minister of Menstruation. But you can, you can preferably just call me Candice. Um, the work that I do speaks to educating young girls, boys, people who menstruate, young, old, whomsoever about menstrual health. I've been serving my nonprofit organization Curate for the past 5 years, where we've been doing these menstrual education programs. On top of that, I am an academic. I am currently a PhD candidate in development studies, an author, TEDx speaker, and social entrepreneur. Thank you. Today, our session is going to be focused on examining the complex interplay of various elements that impede girls' overall well-being. And in particular, we're going to be focusing on not only just health, but also mental health. 2 days ago, it was World Mental Health Day. And often these are conversations that we're not even having within the African landscape about the issues of mental health. But either way, today I'm joined by an esteemed panel of experts who are going to unpack the obstacles that the African girl child experiences. I'd also just like to mention a sincere welcome to our online audience. Please keep those questions going. We will see it on our side and we will integrate it in this section. And I'd also like to say, all protocols observed. Great. So my panelists that are joining us in this conversation today, on my left-hand side, we are joined by Habiba Osman, who is the Executive Secretary for the Human Rights Commission in Malawi. Mulibanji, Habiba. Then we have, to my far left, we have Andile Dube, who is an education manager from the UN or Unicef in South Africa. In particular, she focuses on the quality of health systems and education systems, and in particular, strengthening those systems. And then to my far left, we are joined by Henrietta Ipeleng Bogopan Zulu. He is the Deputy Minister of Social Development, all protocols observed Deputy Minister. And last but not certainly least, we have Beryl Adihambo Opio from Kisimo Feminist Society based in Kenya. I'm sure that she should be joining us online, and we will be integrating her into the conversation today. Now, before we get into the conversation, I think it's really important that I walk you as the audience through the African girl child's health journey with a bit of information. So, when we start with pregnancy, childbirth, and newborns, approximately 300,000 women died from preventable causes related to pregnancy and childbirth in 2015 and the years forward. Worldwide, 1 woman out of 5 still has no access during childbirth to a skilled health professional who could prevent or manage most complications. In some settings, gender-based discrimination can lead to sex-selective abortion and female infanticide. Then when we get to infancy and early childhood, which is 1 month to 4 years, children in sub-Saharan Africa in particular are more than 14 times more likely to die before the age of 5 than children in high-income countries. In some settings, gender discrimination means girls are less likely to have access to vaccines, health services, and good nutrition than their male counterparts. Now, when we look at later childhood and early adolescence, which is 5 to 14, the TikTok generation, as I like to call them, during puberty, gender norms may place restrictions on girls' physical mobility and access to information, which influences their self-esteem and health-seeking behavior as they transition into adulthood. Globally, an estimated 18% of girls, in comparison to 8% of boys, experience sexual abuse at some point in their childhood. An estimated 120 million adolescent girls have experienced forced intercourse or other forced sexual acts. And then finally, in later adolescence and youth, where we call it the pre-adulting stage, where we're sort of learning how to do taxes, but we're not sure yet, young women and girls are subject to a range of harmful practices and violence, including early marriage. Every year, 12 million girls get married before the age of 18 years. In addition, 12.8 million births occur among adolescent girls aged 15 to 19 years old, and 3.9 million unsafe abortions occur among girls aged 15 and 19 each year, contributing to maternal mortality and lasting health problems. In particular, at least 200 million girls, women have undergone female genital mutilation, including about 1 in 3 girls aged 15 and 19 in 30 countries in which the practice is concentrated. This practice contributes to a range of adverse health outcomes. And finally, data shows that when women are not at the table making decisions, it has a profound impact on the health of girls and women. What we often see here is that the decisions that are made in terms of reproductive health, women have to ask their husbands or their boyfriends or any male female representative to make decisions about their own healthcare. So this is something that I think will really contextualize the conversation, and I'm really looking forward to the conversation we're going to have today. So I'm just going to move this way, just to remove the formalities. All right. Okay. So I think we are ready to have the conversation around the African girl child's health and overall well-being. And in particular, to my esteemed panelists, I think we need to focus more on solution-oriented responses. I think with the context that was provided, and especially in the magazine that we all have a copy to, there is a lot of data that shows what, in particular, African girl childs are missing and what the impact has. But I think now we have to be in a space, especially for the next generation, in terms of what solutions do we leave that is legacy building and sustainable. So I'm going to ask each panelist in particular, about their worries and concerns about the state of the girl child today, and in particular, how does your work tackle and addressing these issues? So, Amai Habiba, please, can you start with, what is your worries and current sort of summary of the girl child and how your work addresses those issues?
Thank you very much, Candace, and I'm happy that I'm in a panel with is the Deputy Honorable Minister of Protocols Observed. Yes, I'm happy as well that the previous speaker said it's not it's not just about being happy that it's international, it's the International Day of the Girl Child, but really it's to take stock of what we've achieved, the gains and the losses, and myself, I'm coming from the Commission, the Human Rights Commission. I've also worked in the UN before, and it seems like, we keep on going round and round the same problems.
Yeah.
I just attended, for example, a country capacity assessment for the UN last week, Friday. And one of the biggest things that they said they wanted to tackle was teenage pregnancies and child marriage. And I'm like, but you've been working in these issues for over and over again. We've made some progress. What is happening? So I do believe that. I think, these issues are not only peculiar to Malawi, but I think in our region and also globally. But more importantly, I think when we talk about linking to what you said about menstrual health, I still see that, it's a little bit of tokenism also from the part of the government. It's the conversation is there, has been elevated. So we talk about menstrual health and what the government can do in terms of information management, but also accessibility of sanitary pads and hygiene facilities. The government will say yes, we'll introduce, for example, we'll introduce or we'll ban some taxes, but again at the retail level. The manufacturers and others haven't really sort of like adopted it wholesale. So we do need to make sure that we are moving from just rhetoric to action, which is something that I think that we are not seeing it much in this area.
Yeah.
So even debunking the myths requires that government must come up with a policy that really helps to strengthen, for example, the education sector, that really deals with a lot of these problems. Just to take you back, for example, 20 years ago when my sister went to primary school and she had her first period. I remember all the boys and all the people in the assembly line knew that she had a period. And so fast track 20 years later, 25 years later, we shouldn't be talking about the same things, but these are the problems, the issues that the girl child has when she goes to school, and she hasn't really been equipped with information. But also even when she goes to school, there are no safe spaces for her, but also then there is no conversation around menstrual health and hygiene. And this is something that we're seeing a lot in Malawi. And I do hope that, the civil society organizations that have started working, for example, helping women produce the pads, but also, debunking the myths and the stigma, will continue elevating the conversation so that even our legislators can now move into coming up with policies that can be adopted wholesale in the whole country. So those are some of my concerns. I know that we'll delve into other things, but I just wanted to link to what you had said concerning menstrual health.
And that is definitely very important because I think there's also a major frustration amongst young people as well, who know that, there's strong policy frameworks, but it's in terms of the implementation, the manifestation of these, policies being implemented in actual lived reality. And Andile, I would love to know, what is your current feeling of the state of the girl child, in particular South Africa and Africa, and how is it the work that you do addresses in addressing this crisis?
Thanks, Candice. Firstly, today Knox was supposed to be sitting in this chair because I was in KZN, and we're sitting outside, and there's two girls are coming from a traditional event, and they're wearing their traditional attire, and the amount of people that were staring at them and making passes at them and almost in ways that have never been dealt with, subjecting them into this area with gender-based violence, physical abuse, but mental health issues as well, was overwhelming. And for me, that is the state of a girl child. A few years ago, the National Planning Commission produced a video about Tandy. If you have not seen that video, it's a very important video to see. It says Meet Tandy. And each time I want to talk about a girl child and being women in South Africa, in my mind, there's Tandy. Tandy grows up in this environment where she's trapped in the cycle of poverty. She grows with a single parent. She then meets a man who impregnates her. She has children, and her children has to go to school, but all of the environment that Tandy is thriving within is environment that no young child should be subjected to. Please do Google that video, because it is what we should be thinking about when we are talking about the state of a girl child. And Thandi is not a girl child in South Africa, or a young woman in South Africa only. She's a young child in most African contexts and in most global contexts, where young women will be subjected from these social ills or the environment that they grow within when they are born, and they are perpetually trapped in the cycle, and they will give birth to children who will be trapped in that cycle. So that is for me the biggest issue. The second issue is, linked to that is issues of being trapped in constant poverty. It can't be right that we still have this massive division in our society, and thus affect mostly young girls and women. I'm a mother to a boy, and so I do know that for my boy and for this child to coexist, there are things that I need to teach my child differently. We work in a space where we have to deal with sexual reproductive health issues, and we have beautiful stats, which Honorable will probably touch on. We know that girls get pregnant at age 10, but we do not have stats on how many of those people have been arrested and are in prison and have been tried. And so we've got beautiful policies, and implementation gap continue to affect these young children who will grow up to be women, who will raise children, who will think that what they've gone through is acceptable, when it is not. We constantly, I remember when I was younger, and you're touching on the issues of menstrual health, and when we were younger, we were told about what it means to be menstruating and who not to talk to. You'll be pregnant when you are talking to a boy. You do not have access, and it is still the issues that we are dealing with today. We know that we have had good working relationships between social development, Department of Education, and how to deal with these issues, whether it's through care and support for teaching and learning, or ISHP. But I think we have got very beautiful frameworks, but we have not seen the outcomes of those. And if we continue to raise girls who are existing within these poverty structures, who are existing with the social barriers, who are existing within the structural barriers, we are raising a generation that, for the ladies who are talking about science and maths, which is part of my work as well, who will not be able to thrive in that area of work if they are not cared and supported, if they are still scared of just leaving their houses, if they are scared of being in the school, which is supposed to be a protective environment, if they are expected to be doing the most when they're staying in informal settlements. So it is a lot of things that worries me. But what worries me most is these children are going to be in the same class with my son. They'll be in the same class at university with my son. They'll be expected to exist in the same economy with my son, and who has different experiences in life. And this, for me, is the worry.
And this is definitely something that we have to be focused on in terms of a holistic intervention, not only like focusing on, the girl child and the access that she has to education and resources, but in particular, the boy child. They also go through adolescence journey. They also go through mental health issues. They also need access to health. And these are things that we will be chatting about in this session. Honorable Deputy Minister, thank you for being here. I'd also like to know in particular what your concerns are regarding the state of the girl child in South Africa and Africa, and what work does your department do in alleviating that? It's tough. Yeah.
No. Thank you very much. I think, allow me not to answer that question.
Okay.
But actually to answer it with a question. One of the things that some of us be privileged is to be able to work in an environment that brings everybody together. In an environment where we are closer to home affairs, from cradle to grave, kind of a journey, and also dealing not only with the girl child, with the boy child, with the mother in the same package. So the whole definition of what constitutes a family. But once you've dealt with the family, you then have to disintegrate that family as well, to be able to look at, okay, this is the girl child, this is the boy, because I think where we are and where we need to go, we kind of like stuck.
Mm.
We have all the answers, we know what to do, but we just can't get it done. And part of why we can't get it done is because we are scared of change and we can't handle change. And we struggle to make, like go into the unknown. And why do I say so? What are the elements that I strongly feel about? Like I said, I have the honor to working with the family. And on Saturday, we launched the Family Matter program. But taking from what has been said the whole morning, we fully and 100% agree with every speaker. In all of that, and that has been said, just add the disabled girl there. And your whole life even gets, but after you've added the disabled girl child, the same way that I said you must break down this family, you need to zoom in. What happens to the deaf blind girl child? What are the issues that she has to deal with? Because she can't hear, she can see, and she can talk. But she's entitled to the same rights as that girl. You add the deaf one that doesn't have access to communication. How must she enjoy all of this? And the list goes on. Whether you talk about technology, we talked about technology this morning, but I'm sitting there and I'm a visually impaired deputy minister, and I love technology, and technology makes me perform better or whatever with my peers. Because without technology, I won't be able to do that. I need, as said, to work 3 times harder because I step into a very charged space that actually says I'm not good enough. But being young, being the only, at that time when I arrived, I was the only parliamentarian with a disability that's like 28 years, whatever. South Africa is old. And arriving at 23. And I can never forget, because I was this little girl, very, very tiny. And everybody in the room, led by women, believed I don't belong in that room. And they would send me, how, Wanaka, can you get me a cup of tea? I did it as an African girl who must be respectful. To the extent that I actually forgot, man, I'm also having the gold card. I also took my oath. But I did that, I think, for the first month. And the second month, I was like, and then they bring me a cup of tea. I'm like, no, you can go get it yourself. And what does that translate to? I'm being disrespectful. I'm being rude. I don't want the elders to send me. But actually, I had the right to be in that exact same meeting. And I had the right to hear everything that is being said. But I was spending my time. That's the first thing. But the second thing is that the system was not ready for me. They were not ready for me as a visually impaired child, but they were also not ready for what they called then children in parliament. And I had to wear, because members of parliament wear our gold tags, but all the members of parliament don't wear it. And there are spaces where it says exclusively for members, whether it's a restaurant, but there are demarcated spaces for member of parliament. And I'll get there and they just deny me entry. When they were saying you need to smile I was thinking about myself. I'll just be denied entry. And I'll ask, and I'll be like, no, Boki, nobody your age comes here. So go home and play a bit. It starts. But as a mother of three daughters, of which 2 are visually impaired and the one is fine, I have an advantage of being able to measure from myself to my first daughter, who's 32, that I got from being raped in a special school by a teacher, and we will talk about that later, and to my now 18-year-old who's doing matric this year. I'll skip the middle one. So it doesn't matter whether we talk about ICT. It doesn't matter we talk about, like you are the minister of menstruation. Let me conclude by saying, every time I have to talk about menstruation and the right to sexual health, as a deputy minister in this department, one of the core responsibilities I have is to give girls and boys the right to choose. Now, I come from a village in Puking. It's a beautiful now. During my time, it was a proper village. It's not a proper village now, tarred everywhere and everything, but it was a proper village. And one of the challenges I had to go through, it's exactly what has been said. But the difference between me and then was everybody will be arguing to look after me while I'm sitting there. But I looked after her on Saturday. No, but I looked, and I'll be sitting there like, eh? And because I had fun, I didn't say anything. So I let them argue like I'm not there. And then everybody leaves. I'm like, can I have that cup of tea? So I'm making these opening remarks because I want us to understand that it doesn't matter whether we talk technology, it doesn't matter. We come to menstruation, and I can bring in disaster. We've just had the KZN disasters just now. And it was amusing for me to see, because I was coordinating the disasters, how all of us were eager to bring those sanitary towels. And then I said, okay, guys, where is the panty to put these? How come you are all worried bringing these boxes and boxes and boxes of sanitary towels? Where must these girls put this? Or did you bring it with strings or what? I left home, I lost everything. But no, everybody says I must, enjoy the sexual right and the menstruation. But in a disaster, nobody remembers the panty, but everybody remembers the sanitary towel.
Yeah, it's definitely very powerful. And I think I love your opening remarks being personal, because we cannot remove ourselves. We cannot remove our identities when we're talking about the issues of reproductive health and the issues of overall being. We can't just look past, the data and just say everything is fine. We also have personal stories to share. And I think getting into the conversation, I'd really love for us to talk about poverty, right? And just from an academic point of view, I think poverty is often looked at from a numbers point of game, how many people are impacted, but it's never looked from a gendered perspective. And poverty is gendered, right? When you think of just the amount of double labor that in particular African women have to do, and it's unpaid labor, that is an issue. So I'd like to ask you, Amai Habiba, and then we can go to Deputy Minister in terms of how do we support girls and their families and their communities so that they can break the cycle of poverty? Because poverty really is just one of those shackles that are hindering a girl from accessing education, accessing a better life, and just being overall empowered. So how do we break that cycle?
Good question. I think there's no best answer to that. But I would say that I think they've been promising results. For example, in countries like Malawi and maybe Zambia, very useful, because in Malawi, I know, for example, that we've done a lot of work around social cash transfer. Of course, some of these programs are piecemeal. So sometimes you can also argue that that's not really, the best way to go, and that maybe government must just invest strongly in the ministries that are responsible. For example, the Ministry of Gender, the Ministry of Education, give them enough funding. So, for example, when you look at the Malawi situation, the Ministry of Gender is the one that gets least funding. And so when the Ministry of Finance is making decisions, the Ministry of Gender gets little funding. The Human Rights Commission gets little funding because, these are issues to do with human beings. But I do believe that I think there must be a rethink. Even when you look at the AU Agenda 2063, we're talking about harnessing, the youth dividend, etc. All those things like are on paper. So I would say that I think learning from the conditional cash transfers or social transfers, how can they scale it up to be national? Because some of the times you find that even our development partners are only piloting in maybe 10 districts, or here you'd have provinces. But I think poverty is everywhere. So I would say one way is to sure that we scale up those programs. But again, I think you also have to combine it with community initiatives. There are initiatives right now, like we've seen the Spotlight Initiative, where directly and deliberately you're targeting, a community leaders as well as women organizations. Because, for example, if you look at agrarian economies like Malawi, 82% of 82% of those that make up that economy or sector are women. And so it means they're really developing, they're really working towards, assisting the country. But again, you find that, there's the digital divide, as Rachel had said earlier, that we are not investing a lot. But I do believe that if we also invest in our SMEs as well as the women, because they're the ones who are really contributing to the back of the work, we'll find that they'll be able to send their children to school. They'll be able to sustain themselves. Possibly I cannot compare it with South Africa, but these are some of the issues that, when you look at how do we empower our women. So the intersectionality between women and girls, you cannot really remove that. It's very important that we empower the women. But again, I think just to also agree that there are issues to do with allyship. So the attitudes, the change and behaviors, the norms. I still believe that we are in a century after COVID. We've learned that men are also vulnerable. So we cannot really leave them out in all the work that we're doing, especially in promoting gender equality. The conversation around okay, we can do it alone or women can do it alone. I don't think so, because even in the menstrual health issues that we're talking about debunking, why don't we find, for example, change agents, and work with men, and also the programs that are really promoting let's say he for she, which you've heard of, are really actually helping. And data is showing that if you bring men on board, they can be the champions. In Malawi, you cannot talk about abortion because it's really a taboo. And we had a male MP actually right now who's been advocating for the law around abortion. So it also is very helpful to have men also really advocate those issues. So I think that a combination of the programmatic interventions, like the social cash transfers, the change, the attitudes and behavior, but we can also not forget the issue about the legal frameworks. Of course, we're talking about the implementation, but I keep on insisting with my fellow advocates and others that if we have the laws that are not costed, we will not be able to achieve anything. So maybe let's cost our laws. Let's do, budget responsive policies or laws so that at least they can translate into something.
Ultimately, you need all of those things that you mentioned to work to provide not even a gender sensitive, but a gender transformative society.
Absolutely.
I am aware that Beryl is with us. Beryl, I wonder if you can hear us. We would really appreciate an understanding, because Amai Habiba mentioned about the issues around attitudes, and in particular, what are you seeing from Kenya in terms of dismantling these attitudes in ending the poverty, the cycle of poverty, in particular in ensuring that young girls believe that they can break the cycle of poverty?
Hi, am I that audible?
Okay, I'm not sure if she's muted.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
I think you can try speaking now, Sis Beryl.
Okay. Am I audible?
Yeah, she's still muted. All right, so we're going to give the opportunity for the tech team to sort that out. I think it might be an input and output issue, but whilst they're sorting out the technical issue, Honorable Deputy Minister, would you like to respond in terms of seeing in particular, what is it that we need to end the poverty crisis in South Africa? And what is it that's working right now? And what is it that really we need to sort of remodel to include more? Wow, that's me. To include more people, to end the inequality of poverty in South Africa.
Being in the Department of Social Development, obviously we are the department that has the core responsibility amongst 100 of other things we need to do in terms of poverty. But one of the mistakes we always make is that poverty is defined in different ways. As much as I agree that education is an equalizer, but it becomes a bit of a problem for some of us that are exposed to the length and breadth, and that you you judge poverty by based on the level of education, that becomes the problem. And it goes back to what one of the speakers said, that nobody actually remembered that the pot making is an engineering by itself. Not all of us will go to school. And if you look at the richest people in the world, they did not necessarily get defined, but how far. And at the moment, that is where the challenge starts. The second aspect, we all talk about choice. Now, I can talk with authority on that subject because I'm also the Deputy Minister responsible for the South African Social Security Agency, the famous SASSA. It's one of the responsibilities. And sitting here, I mean, when this year alone, we put a budget, the cash transfers that will go, we placed a budget only on the different social security at 280 billion rand. And that excludes your 350 aspect, because when you add that, at the moment we are at 80 billion rand. And you take the 350 just consciously. Other people are today having businesses out of that 350. Others enjoyed it at a tavern. So the long and short of it, I'm trying to say, when somebody is looking outside, thinks that, okay, let's get the cash transfers, they will pull people out of poverty. Yes, they pull others, but for others, they don't. Not by lack of trying, but because we define poverty in different ways. If I stay in a rural area in my mud house, as the former Deputy Minister of Public Works, I can also speak in authority. A lot of the people said, no, I don't want a brick house. I want to keep my mud house. And no, I don't want to stay in a row. I want to stay with my a neighbor on the other side of town. And the others said, no, we don't want the tap water to be brought into our homes, because you are taking away, as a young girl growing up, at this time, I know we are meeting at the river. And it was never about just take the water and go. No. When you get there, you turn the bucket and you sit on it and we have a conversation. And when we take away these little things, and we look at it, okay, the girls are going very far to fetch water, which I agree. But when you take that water fetching to bring the tap in the house, then create something that assists them to still have the same activity. And that way they are enabled to be activated. Now, everybody, I just want to get that one. Legislation, very important, because then you have recourse. And costing, very important. But I'm going to consciously stay away from data, not that I don't know it. Pardon me, guys, I'm a politician, so I stay away from numbers. It's not our strength. But nonetheless, I have the statistics. But today, I just want to talk about our everyday life. I want us to think beyond today, but also to begin to identify the little things that we do, either to sustain patriarchy, to get, Lebu used the very, very important, the systematic. But I always use the word girl child under siege from all directions. Whether it's in the home, whether it's walking in the street, it doesn't matter. They just under siege. They are between the rock and a hard place as we speak, sitting in this room. But they're not in the, one is, of course, what I call the mobile macho man with money. That animal is disturbing my girls. Everybody in the auditorium, I'm looking for it. When you do find it, please let me know. What I'm going to do with it is not important. You just leave it for me, I will. And on the other side is that some of us have a legacy to be remembered for. And I took a decision consciously, as I said, I've been in government or in politics, the same as my father's seat, is I took a conscious decision that I want to be remembered for my work with traditional leaders, supporting rural communities that never gets to be supported. Now, let me conclude the statement so I can get back to you. Girl children and poverty, and how do we define poverty, and what is it that will assist us to say you are out of poverty? The education part is easy. Did you go to school? Yes, ma'am. The next tick, did you do water? Yes, it's unpaid labor. And yes, we should not be doing it, but we can't blame that for everything that makes us poor. And I refuse to actually join that space because you see, as a rural girl, there are values that I was taught that makes me who I am. I have a problem with when all of us step in and say African, everything African, it's a burden. I have a big problem with that because it's not in itself true. Sanitary towels. There was a time I was called and said, Deputy Minister, you are this very in your face, controversial Deputy Minister in this government. Can you please sign off on reusable sanitary towels? So they walked in and I looked at them. I'm like, yeah. And I said, sorry, I can't support them. And everybody looked at me like, yeah, you are selfish. And I said, no. As a deputy minister, I have the right to give the girl a choice. But don't ask for my personal thing, because I grew up in a family where I never afforded a sanitary towel until I went to work. And for me, I had to cut up my grandmother's old sheets, fold them and use them as pads. And I had to wash them and hang them. Now, when you come to me with that experience, with a pad that's covered, and this girl has to wash it, where there isn't even water to drink, what do you call that? And I said, after having hanged, and I had to wash them in the little water I washed in, you are not going to ask me to endorse a reusable sanitary towel covered in the seshweshwe I used back then.
Thank you, Honorable. That's a very strong and powerful point, because I think what your point touches to is that we can't have a one size fits all approach and solutions approach in addressing poverty, because there's an element of inclusivity that we often forget about, and there's also an element of agency. You know, we look at humans and we need to recognize that these aren't victims; they have their own agency and they can be empowered. But let's give them the tools to empower them. And I'd love to speak to Sis Beryl about her focus on the power of, you know, changing the disempowering narrative around gender myths in particular, but also how she feels in terms of the inclusiveness of policy speaking to poverty. Do you think poverty really is inclusive in terms of addressing the solutions, or is it just looking at it from a black and white solution? So I hope we do have you back. I hope you can hear us.
Hi, can you hear me now?
Can.
Okay, hi. My name is Beryl up here from Kisumu, but you can call me Africa. Everyone calls me Africa. So for me, I would really talk about the policies that exist, and I would like to offer a critique by saying Kenya is one of the countries that is so good on paperwork. We have some of the best policies on paper that you can read and actually go through and be really impressed that, wow, we are doing the work. But when it comes to actual implementation, when it comes to actually making these policies work, oftentimes most of the realities just end on paper. And linking poverty back to young adolescent girls, who will be my focus maybe for today, it's really sad that in as much as we exist in a 21st century, I come from a deeply patriarchal society that does believe that educating a girl is a wastage of resources and time and money. Therefore, you find that most girls do not have access to education compared to their male counterparts, and most girls oftentimes stay out of school and, like, end up doing small jobs to keep the family going instead of, like, being in class and learning with their, like the male counterparts. And in as much as it's a cliche and a lot of discussions has been around it, I'm always of the opinion that girls accessing education is one of the many ways of breaking the cycle of poverty. And I always use myself as an example. I grew up in a very poor area. Like, my whole life, I grew up in a slum. And yet, my mother used to insist that we'd go to school even if we didn't have anything to eat. Like, the fact that we just sit in class and learn, in as much as it was difficult, was something my mother was so big on, and she was so particular on us finishing school. And this really helped me and my other siblings in a way or two, but especially me, because my access to education really opened doors and opportunities for me in regards to, like, getting sponsorships and scholarships for my school, and also being part of conferences and meetings that also helped me in regards to networking, hence my being here today. So I tend to look at access to free and affordable education as one of the many ways in which young girls can also, like, break the cycle of poverty. Because I believe, just like someone had said before, in their presentation or the discussion, when you educate one woman, when you educate one girl, there's always a possibility of them extending this back to the whole community. And bringing it again back to me, accessing education. At that time, it was free education. Currently, we don't have it. Having access to free education, which would only see my mother have to provide things like uniform and food for me. Once it opened opportunities for me, I also got the responsibility to actually have to extend this chance to other girls back in my area, because limiting it to just me having an access to education and actually being in a position of privilege where I went to school, I actually have a job currently, I can get my own money, and just leaving it at that would not have broken down the cycle for me, because it still would mean there were other girls who would be as unfortunate as I am. And I do not think that poverty ended with me back then, where I used to grow. So for me, this looks like going back to my community and having initiatives that actually push and encourage parents to actually keep their girls in schools. And this has been so difficult, especially since we are trying to deal with cultural beliefs and, like, patriarchal beliefs that have existed long way before I was born, where, like, people believed educating a woman is a waste of money, having a girl go to school is such a wastage, girls should be married off early because it means, in my culture, you'll get cows, and, educating a boy child will actually mean having someone to support you. But through the many interventions that we've been doing on community level, where we talk to parents, we explain to parents why they need to keep all their children in school regardless of their sex and gender, and why education is important, especially currently. We've been able to see a few parents come up to challenge these beliefs where, if someone says, like, nyako knya school, like, a girl cannot go to school in Luo, it makes me so happy to hear, fathers and mothers saying, no, these are beliefs of the past. These are things that happened way back. I don't think these are things that are happening right now. So I'm actually very happy to see that the work that we're doing currently in regards to breaking the cycle of poverty and, like, demanding that there's an increase in access to affordable education is actually bearing fruits, especially with parents, since most of them are starting to actually let go of those harmful, old, toxic beliefs that, kept on perpetuating the cycle of poverty. But also, just like someone said, I don't think one intervention can fit everyone, because access to education is one of the many ways of breaking the cycle. But what happens if a girl goes to school, but, like, they are kept out of classes because period poverty, they can't sit in class because they don't have pads? Or what happened when a girl goes to school but they're too hungry to even study? Or what happens when a girl goes to school but, just like someone has said, grown men outside are all over their cases, enticing them with so many things, phones, money, pads in some cases. So I would finish up by saying, like, I'm very sure there's no one intervention that fits all, which is why I'm also like very keen and excited to hear what other people have to say in regards to this. But for me, my organization and I doing the work around demanding that parents keep their children in school has really helped in terms of changing social attitudes and norms. But when it comes to policies, I am of the idea that we as Kenya still have a long way to go. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. We will definitely still be in touch. So I hope you are still there listening to the interactions. And so I'm basing this panel discussion on the three P's. The first P we focused on was poverty. The second one that I want to focus on is puberty. And puberty is an inevitable part of growing up. We all went through perhaps probably the most awkward transition into adulthood. And the reason why it was so awkward is because we did not have the enablement or the access to education, right? And part of the reason we see, in particular, young adolescent girls who are going to school feel awkward during this time is because there's no sexual and reproductive health, the little to access to of sexual health and reproductive health initiatives in keeping girls in school. So, Sis Andile, I really want to ask you, what is it that UNICEF has been doing in terms of addressing this need to not only provide the access, but empower the girl child to feel that the process of growing up is not awkward, but also ensuring that the boy child has access to this information. And I also want to see like if there's perhaps any interventions that you're doing, not only focusing on children, but also equipping teachers to have the necessary training in addressing these issues, and perhaps maybe providing the resources to parents as well. So I'd love to know what you're doing in that space.
Sure. So firstly, the UN's work is around supporting government to ensure that policies, strategies, plans implemented maximally. So whatever we do comes from that. So it would be not just be what the UNICEF is doing, but what these partners, the social partners, and how the UN will support government in doing that. But there's a number of areas of work that I would want to touch on. Firstly, as the UNICEF, we know the clear causal link around keeping kids at school being protective. So if you keep children at school, it's protective. So that's why I want schools to be safe as well. It's protective around against social ills. The longer children stay out of school, the more likely they are to drop out and to be pregnant, to be involved in criminal activities. So just keeping children at schools is protective. But the next layer is we need to be able to then provide capacity for them to receive the education, the skills, the knowledge, and the behavioral change programming that they need to have. So as the UN Festival, what we do is support for teaching and learning and schooling. I'd mentioned earlier that, we deal with curriculum issues and performance and system outputs and all of those. But if we have not dealt with providing caring and supporting environments, then we are never going to deal with issues of puberty and transition from adolescence into adulthood. So that's the main area of work we do. We've supported the government to deal with issues of curriculum. And again, it's one of the biggest issues in South Africa, the best curriculum that we have, the best resources that we have, but no capacity of the system to actually implement that. I mean, we often talk about the fact that the teachers who are teaching children about behavioral change, sexual reproductive health, menstrual health, and all of the issues that surround SRH are the same teachers who would have grown up in a context where a teacher cannot talk openly to children about sex and sexuality, about prevention, about the options, about all of those, about reporting rape, because they're likely to be carrying some of the historical barriers that they also have. So capacity building is quite critical, but we also know that we need to also support organizations that then capacitate the system, or the teachers who probably do not have the capacity to address that, to do that. So that's our area of work. The last one, we do a lot of work in menstrual health. We We know earlier someone spoke about, I think you spoke about the infrastructure and access. We know that menstrual health is not only going to be about information, or you are now in puberty, you're going to be receiving your menses and so on and so on, but it's also going to be access to environments that makes it friendly for the young children. We know that most young children are existing in environments that doesn't even have proper toilet infrastructure. So no matter how you talk about puberty and what will happen to them, but if you have not provided the resources for them, that becomes an issue. So that's the whole area of work that we're supporting government on. So the WASH programs and all of the work that is related to that. We also do a lot of work around protection, child protection and gender-based violence. With puberty comes a whole lot of changes. Young people then do not know what to deal with at any given time. So you have to help young people to unravel these difficulties that they exist within, and particularly because there is no one else to talk to. We support that area of work. I think COVID-19 has also been great in one way. It has made everyone be aware of the mental health and psychosocial support needs that exist in South Africa and globally. We assume that because young children are just going on, there are no mental health issues. So we invest our time and effort and our technical expertise in that area. And we're hoping that, everyone who works in the space of adolescence development and youth development, just remember the component of mental health and psychosocial support. And COVID-19 has really created a lot of gaps in that. But I wanted to just make sure that we know that when we deal with those issues, we're not only capacitated the children and the girls, we are capacitating the boys who coexist with them. We want boys to be conduits. We want boys to understand their changing roles in society. We want young boys to understand earlier what it means to bring in issues, toxic masculinity in the areas of work. And so whilst we're talking about the girl child today, we are not saying this capacity is only for girls, but it is about how do we make sure that we share this with the boys. We make sure that the boys are much, much more capacitated to deal with their changing environments and their roles, and be socialized differently. And that's the area of work. So between policy support, curriculum support, extracurricular support programs, dealing with sports for development, which is a very good tool to capacitate young people, dealing with mental health and psychosocial support for both boys and girls. But because today is International Girl Child, we want to make sure that we understand that if we have a girl who coexists in a safe environment, everyone else is likely to coexist.
And I definitely do have a follow-up question with regards to the obstacles of menstrual health. And I think what I'd love for us to now do is incorporate any specific questions that are from the audience. And if you do have a specific question, please direct it to a specific panelist, and keep your question short and sweet. I'll also check online if there's any specific questions as well. So we're going to take the first round of questions. I will keep it to 3, and then the second round we'll keep it to 3. So I'll start here. The gentleman at the back there, and the lady in red in the middle here. Let's see what the engagement's going to be like. I'm also going to check online if people have been commenting online. No, here. So I'll just pass it behind.
Just an observation, Candace, you are the Minister of Menstruation. I'd like to join you as the Minister of Menopause.
I think, we need Unicef to work alongside. Yes.
Because girl child becomes the woman child. And it's just as difficult to go through menopause as it is anyway.
And expensive, apparently.
It is. And the mental issues that go with that are duplicated in your life again. So just an observation. But Habiba, I think you said the move from rhetoric to action is something very, very important. And the Deputy Minister said that we're scared of change, we're scared to change, and we're scared of the unknown. Is it something in our language that perhaps is making us not make that change? and not make us take the step to the unknown. We use soft words like we urge and we call on you to do so and so, instead of using tougher language when it comes to implementation. So we don't go from rhetoric to action. And I put that to all the panelists because it seems to be that rhetoric to action or implementation is so difficult. Is it our language that is too soft?
Okay, so we're going to take the first round and then you just, make note of it. Thank you so much, Minister of Menopause. Well, duly noted. We have the lady there in the middle, and then we'll move to you at the back. Sure. Are we on? No load shedding here, please. I don't know if I'm audible. Okay, thank you. There we go.
I just want to ask the Deputy Minister and Mrs. Andile about consultations when it comes to policy making. What are the complexities that you find when trying to go into societies like rural areas where it's very traditional and you need to speak on matters of sexual and reproductive health rights? In as much I heard you were talking about inclusivity and it can't be one size fits all approach to policy. So what are the complications that you come across, and how is it that in terms of implementing programs, how are you educating people beyond the subject, which is the young girl? Because they belong to the society at large. So what other interventions are they to educate people on sexual and reproductive rights beyond the subject being the young girl?
Okay. Shout out Action Aid team. I see the shirts. Amandala. There you go. And then to the gentleman, the gentle brother at the back, if you don't mind just sending the mic through.
Hi, I'm going to try and keep this short. This one is to Deputy Minister and to Sisandile. With regards to, so you guys were talking about how, it's been years, and we're still having the same conversation where around the sanitary pads, etc., etc. And for men, obviously, right now in this current state in Africa, a lot of leadership is men. And I was asking, is it not possibly because there's a division in society, even in an educational capacity, even with social development, for example, where we divide women and men? So, for example, I went to a co-ed school. Over there, when we were dealing with puberty, right, from primary school, for example, by the time we got to high school, it wasn't a big issue, the matter of periods. But then what did become an issue that teachers didn't want to deal with was the new phase, which comes afterwards, which is the sexuality around that now. You know what I mean? And then from there on in, everything else becomes taboo from there on in, to the point where now that boy child who was ready to hear the conversations about what's happening with the other gender is now not ready to hear it anymore because it's become taboo, and vice versa as well, till they become the grown-ups now who are 50, 40, 60, etc., who now have missed out on 30, 40, 50 years worth of education, of changes that is happening congruently. As it's changing for themselves, it's also changing for the opposite sex. But now they don't know anything of it, and they don't want to deal with it because to them it feels taboo to deal with, but they expect it to now deal with it all of a sudden because they're in a position of power. So should we not be trying to de-separate society? I mean, we look at toilets, for example, like it's separated, you know what I mean? It's like you shouldn't know what's going on the other side, you know what I mean? Should we not try and de-separate society in order for us to then have the same issues that we're dealing with, and we deal with them as one, instead of, oh, this is women's issues and this is guys' issues, etc., etc.?
So being more, how do we be more gender inclusive within the response to issues that doesn't leave the boy child behind is a very important question. And I feel like some of these questions I can answer them, but I am a facilitator, so I'm off today as the Minister of Menstruation. But feel free to watch my TED talk, because I do talk about it in terms of how we incorporate boys. And I think in just brief, language matters, right? So the language you use around menstruation is very important. If we think of menstruation, often people will say it's a woman and girls issue, when in fact it isn't. Menstruation is everyone's issue, and when you use exclusionary language, it deliberately leaves the boy child behind, right? When we see educational systems of let's separate the girls so they learn about menstrual health and puberty, and then the boys go on the field to play. That again is leaving them behind, because they are going to be future fathers, future business leaders, future whatevers that will integrate with menstruators in the space, right? So it's about being practical and also removing the negative narrative that if we talk openly about periods or talk openly about sex, that children are just going to be wild beasts on the streets. That's not the case, right? I think we'd rather have an empowered and informed child, girl and boy child, that knows adequately and affirmed and empowered in terms of the education and information, rather than just not knowing at all. Because the data shows that if a child doesn't know anything at all, they will then make consequential information life choices. So we need to have that transition from abstinent-based education, where it says refrain from sex, don't talk about periods, and we need to move to comprehensive sexuality education. And Honorable Minister, for the past 5 years, we've been doing this work in workshop settings. We've also created animated content that speaks to these things. So I think it's an element of cross-collaboration and enabling us as small organizations, as small CSOs, as Amai Habib's mentioned, in collaborating with government to enable us to empower more people. But let's start with the questions. I think you have a question here, you have 2 questions. So I think let's try and keep them short and sweet in terms of time and responding. And then I think during the lunch break, we can be able to discourse further. So am I happy we can start with your question?
Okay. Thank you very much for your question. And I think when I mentioned rhetoric to action, the word action itself needs to be unpacked, because I believe there are so many angles and there's so many ways in which we can address that issue, but just unpack it, for example, in the different contexts that we've spoken about today, but even earlier this morning. So, for example, when I look at our own country as Malawi, I think some of you have encountered Chief Kachindamoto, who's annulled like 2,000 marriages plus. And I'm happy to say that I was the one anchoring that work behind the scenes with Chief Kachindamoto for the past 6 years when I was with UN Women, but also just helping out the traditional leaders and the religious leaders to understand the policies and the laws and how to break those down, and so that they could have their own bylaws that they could work with. So I would say Malawi is a good example, and maybe Zambia as well, where traditional leaders and religious leaders have been in the forefront to address issues of gender imbalance, gender inequalities, including GBV and child marriages. So in that regard, again, I think it was a deliberate effort by government to make sure that these leaders are also leading within that space. I think it can work. And I do believe that there are positive results in that regard. So when I talk about the gender equality context, I would say bringing in really change agents, because some of these issues, as you said, as you see in the communities, the people themselves have the solutions. It's not that the solutions should be brought from outside, but they have the solutions. And if we engage them, if we let them lead, we see that there are results in that regard. When it comes to politicians, no offense to the Honorable Minister, but we have data that is there. Like even today, these books that have been shared with us, there's enough data to go around to help us to inform programming, to inform decisions, political decisions. But there is also a tendency by government and by politicians to deliberately ignore that. And we had already heard the Honorable Minister, it's not her, she says she hates data, but it's most of the politicians that hate data. It's very difficult.
The numbers are overwhelming.
Yeah, the numbers are overwhelming. And maybe there is need for us to even do just research to understand why politicians hate evidence-based.
And in addition, the Minister of Menopause did say what is it that we need in terms of the languaging for that to bridge the gap between the government and politicians to not be overwhelmed by the data. Because oftentimes when we are providing the memorandums of demand or whatever, it's heavy data first. So what is the transition there? Do we soften our language?
I do think we must soften our language, and sometimes also maybe those working in the development space, we're sort of like we're in our world where we're using, matrices, we're using, difficult language to break it down. But I'm happy, for example, with Unicef, you've developed a culture recently of, coming up with the technical guidance notes. And I think they're user friendly, but I think those are some of the documents that, must be available, to our politicians, but also in schools, even, within the school setup, but, just for everyone else to understand them. So, for example, when we talk about Chief Kajinda Moto, she didn't go to school, but again, if you translate that language, if you translate those technical documents in language that they can use, they're able to understand and able to engage and conveys with their, subjects or their communities. So I would say that, it's a lot to unpack, but yes, language is an issue, but also just, tackling the issues head on, because you find also that it's to do with leadership. If leadership is committed and invested to doing that, then they can move from that rhetoric of promising people during campaign time to delivering it when they're in office. So that's also what I wanted to say.
Very powerful. We have 2 questions for the both of you. And I think to summarize what they were asking, how do we not leave the boy child in interventions that speak to education? And I think there's also a conversation about stakeholder engagement in the rural areas and what are the challenges you find in that. So Sis Andile, I'll start with you, and then we can play a tennis match between the two of you.
No, we're not playing a tennis match, the DM. So firstly, I think this idea of data and political leadership, we should all agree that it should be something that that right now we're talking about it as just a joke. Ministers and deputy ministers have to use data all the time. So we're not, in our engagements, we're not going to be sitting with a minister or a deputy minister and not talk about the fact that this percentage of young children are getting pregnant. Because unless we talk numbers, we're not going to be seeing the agency of solving the issues. So, of course, when I started my conversation, I said meet Thandi, because Thandi is a human being and there's a story to tell. But what I could have said is what is the percentage of the young people in South Africa who's not in education, employment and training, and what are the implications, and what is the percentage for gender-based violence? By the time I'm done, everyone in this room is good and bored. But the data is there, and the data needs to be used for us to be able to make evidence-informed decisions and to really track the progress that we are making and deal with issues of impact and measure that. So that we need to be able to deal with. The issues of language usage also stem that from the data, because if you might mean in academic conferences as a PhD, my conversation is different than when I'm in a room where we want to have real, frank conversation about the state of young children in South Africa and what they go through. Language, we struggle with this in almost all sectors. We went in one of the conferences, we were talking about, make example of parents or women or dads will talk to their children about their private parts and not talk about vagina or penis. They will talk about the cake and the clay and until the child is raped. Until the child is raped, and at court the child has to use the language. So unless we know that language usage is that important, we are really going to perpetuate. I mean, we're going to be disadvantaging disadvantage our children. When my son picks up a pad and I'm unable to use that as a teachable moment, we are disadvantaging children. So language usage is very important, whether in educating, whether in guidance in everything that we do and in the technical advice that we provide. The biggest thing is the language that we use is the language that should send a message, but also get people into action, but also give people a permission, give teachers permission to sit in front of their classroom and talk about sex and sexuality, Mandisa, and talk about what it means to, to be a young child and receiving menstruation. The second question that was addressed to me was about consultation. One of the biggest issues, policy consultation. But I think the idea is if you are sitting in Gauteng or Pretoria and you're developing policies without consulting people who actually are sitting somewhere in the real Ngandla or Zingi Zingi, as one of the ministers had mentioned, you really are you continue to deal with paper-based policies. In South Africa, there are structures if you cannot get into proper dialogues with or maximize dialogues with some of the groups. They are representatives, they are NGOs, they are structures, they are traditional leaders, they are all other structures that should be used for that policy engagement. And if we are not doing that, then there is no need to go around talking about how effective our policies are. Recently, and I think I would like to share this with you, who've asked this question. We've been consulting with young people on Generation Unlimited and Education Plus, which is a program around access for young girls and keeping girls at school, making sure that they receive quality education, but deal with issues of SRHI, CSE, and all of those areas. And one young girl somewhere in Chesterville stood up and said, guys, you sit here and you want to use rhetoric when we are dealing with policy because you do not read the policies or you do not engage in conversations about policies. So for us who are on the other side of 40, wanted to say 21, but I've already spoken about how old I am. If we are sitting in a room with young people, because we really, really want to drive this notion of nothing for us without us.
True.
But if we are sitting in that conversation and we are talking about policy and policy implementation and development and access, but we find that young people do not know the policies, then we default into educating. So we then will educate and we educate and we educate. By the time we are done, young people do not have a voice on what the policy should be because they see us as educators and not people who should be there as to listen. So for young people, you need to be able to know enough about those policies, educate others who do not have the access to those policies so that they know. And when they challenge the status quo and they're sitting in front of the minister, they know their story and they know what they want to say, so that cannot be, oh, but we already have that, oh, but we already do that. And I then said to adults, which is one of the questions about parental involvement, okay, for us, the younger one who know Common and John Legend, there's their song about, they've got a song that says glory, and it says it takes the wisdom of the old and the energy of the young. And that's what should be defining the changes that we want to see, because young people have energy, but the older one are likely to have the policy knowledge. But we have a whole lot of young people at universities who deal with policy reform, and that's what we need. The last question that you asked on parental involvement, it's the same thing. And schooling, we want parents, it's teachers as parents also to have the language, to have the capacity to address some of these issues. Last question that you ask is about separation. We deal with that all the time. In our programming, we've been able to say to teachers, there is no way that you are going to be teaching a young girl about the fact that her boobs are going to grow, but take the young boy outside, because you still need to teach the young boy about masturbation and the hair and the change in voice and all of the changes that are going to happen to him. And so people who are involved in the space should ensure that when we are dealing with capacity building, we do not separate the genders. You don't say, oh, can you go out, boys, because we are going to be talking about menstruation, and then hope that boys at some stage will be conduits, will not stigmatize girls, will not laugh at girls who are menstruating. On parental involvement, lastly, we last year, the Department of Basic Education and partners launched a program called Breaking the Silence, which is on TV. And those are some of the areas where we are saying, okay, if you can't get the parents at school, we'll get parents through media, we'll get through parents through programming. It should be something that we all do to make sure that we deal with capacity building. That is ongoing, and information changes. Right now, we are dealing with climate change. It will affect more girls than it will affect the boys. It will affect more women than it will affect the men. So all of those issues will have to be a continuous education for a lot of people who are, unfortunately, the mothers right now are also very young mothers who had not had this education. I think I've covered all of the questions, but
definitely.
yeah,
And
if
I
you
think
give me another hour.
I think we probably need another hour, but I'm aware we are very we're all are hungry for knowledge, but I think in particular we also are hungry for food, and we are nearing to the close to the session. So, Honorable Minister, would you just like to, sort of give specific closing remarks, in particular to there's a young Action Aid team here, and I think they are very young people who want to know what it is that they need to do in addressing and collaborating with government, and then in particular speaking to the issue of separation of boys. And when you finally wrap that up, then I'll just ask one more question to Sis Beryl, and we'll wrap up the session. So, Honorable Minister.
I hope I'm audible.
Yes.
Okay, let's start first with your first question said puberty. And what I always say is like 11th October 2022. When 9-year-olds get pregnant, they don't even have the opportunity to experience this poverty, this puberty we are talking about. Because that's where we are as South Africans, is that our pregnant girls start at 9. By the time they are 14, they have their second child. So when we talk about puberty, what exactly are we talking about? Because the truth of the matter is, and I have the honor and privilege to spend a lot of time with children through the programs that I am the champion of. But I also need to agree that I was just making a joke with politicians. We do use that. But the reality is that we are human beings coming from communities. And as a politician, you obviously will be attracted to issues that you are passionate about. And you would lead and the agenda that you are passionate. Yes, you will do this and that and that and that. But at the end of the day, we are also influenced by what is happening around you, who you are exposed to, and who you are talking to. Now, I want to say one of the challenges, this department is very big, but will, like an elephant, small, small. In the past, before we had COVID, every mother would blame the teacher. They all had reasons why their children are pregnant at that age. But the highest number of pregnancies happened during lockdown level 5. We had the highest numbers of 9 and 11-year-old that delivered, of course, the following year when we are still in COVID. Now, who do we have to blame? Who are we pointing at? You can't say as a mother you did not see that your 9-year-old is pregnant. But let me pass that. So I want us to have that at the back of our head. When we talk about puberty and our children don't even have the opportunity to experience that, what exactly are we talking about? The second aspect of the question was that the language that we use. I want to agree with Unicef that there's power in language. The choice of words, how you use the language, there is power in it. But language can also be an instrument that stimulates. I could sit here and say, yeah, but when I talk, I always relax and want you, after I've said something, to just think about it. So it's ideas that by choice, I leave you thinking beyond the space of the thinking capacity. We have a compendium of programs answering the issues around the boy child and the girl child. Social development, we have boys' assemblies. where we create a safe space for boys alone to actually talk about whatever it is that affects themselves. And one of the things that, so I facilitate them myself, by the way. And one of the things that I will never forget, it was one of the boys' assemblies, where this young boy just said, I asked my mother who my father is. And my mother said to me, and he was 12, Uskan, I don't know how to, don't annoy me with your useless father who can't even buy you a 2.5 kg of millimil. Right? That's not just one story. And when whoever the father that the mother never wanted to tell this boy about, when he died, the same mother took this boy to the funeral and made her, and they opened the coffin and they said, here lies your father. Right? Now, what must happen to that boy? Because I then said, okay, did you ever get cancer? He said, no, they just showed me this dead man, and then everybody's life went on. I facilitate sessions called Ditsala, which is a program where we look at 6 to 9 year olds. And in that program, we talk about anything. What is very painful is a South African child, I don't want to say a girl or a boy, by the time they are 8, they are already drinking alcohol. Not at the tavern, in the house. So as we design programs, and I'm using this alcohol one, in the past, we will go to teach them about alcohol at home. We'll go teach them about alcohol in the streets. But now we must change our focus because the alcohol is in the home. So how do you then get into the home as government to start policing parents? But we move along to say, how do we consult? We also have a program called Chomi. So Ditsala is for 6 to 9 year old, and it's the children's shield, where the children are like just saying, protect me. 10 to 14 year olds it's Chomi, with a tagline that says, invest in my future, protect me today. And it's boys and girls, where they have the space where we need to actually understand their life, their challenges, to be able to design programs that enable. But it's also an opportunity that we use to consult on policy issues, because the Unicef will not let us have peace, because the Convention on the Rights of the Child says we must consult children. So we use that opportunity of Chomi to actually engage children at that age on, amongst others, the policies that are in parliament that are going to affect their lives, and get to be their spokespersons. We've got Young YOLO, which is you only live once. It's your choice. It's my choice. It's my life. And I choose to behave responsibly. And the intention of that program is basically to say, okay, here we are. Here's our age. We're struggling between teenage and child. In terms of the definition of child. Then we've got YOLO that focuses on 19 to 24 year olds. But we've got the rock leadership where we empower, and we've trained like for 5 days, from the king to the queen to the induna to the councillor. I sit here, I can tell you how many tribal councils we have, to make them champions of all of the different social challenges where they govern. Now, as we celebrate the girl child, as we celebrate the African girl child, we must never forget that in whatever we say, it must never be our perspective. We must always take into consideration where that child comes from, where that girl comes from, what is the structure of the family that they come from. My parents always thought I will be Babsi Mlangeni. I will sing, because when I was born as a visually impaired, that was the only thing, and that was the only mentor. What do you call it in English? Role model that they had. So they couldn't dream beyond me singing, and trust me, I can't sing, even if you paid me for it. And everybody had already put me in a box. And that is what we all do. You have to fit in a particular box. If you don't fit in that box, there's something wrong with you. Now, if you want to empower the girl child, whether it's about keeping girls in school, because keeping a girl in school goes beyond. It's not about sanitary towels. It's about that child, now that she's 9, she needs to go back. That child must have an early childhood development center where she can leave this child. Contraceptives must be there at the ECD so that by the time she drops off the child in the morning on her way to school, she can also connect her contraceptives. And those are just but some of the elements of how do you keep a girl in school. Let me conclude by saying, when I got married, just closing with what Mama said, my grandmother was a very wise woman. Firstly, my father was very clear. I'm not losing my surname. And he said, you are going to have 2 surnames so that you never forget that you are a guest in that house.
Okay.
You remain a guest, KwaZulu. And in Setswana, you must never forget, whatever and wherever you go, they will never ask your name first. They say, Ungwanamang, whose child are you? Right? So you need to know how you are going to represent me. But also, when I got married, remember the headlines, I can never forget, said, blind NP tie the knot. That's what the newspapers went, which I didn't have a problem. But I remember my grandmother, when the very old women that made her to sit down and tell them tales, my grandmother Masfako said to them, if the Zulu family is looking for a domestic worker, they came to the wrong family. If the Zulu family is looking for a person that's going to iron or cook, they've come to the wrong family. If they are looking for somebody that will be washing the curtains and cleaning their house, they've come to the wrong family. But then the one lady from my husband's family said, yeah, but she must also understand that her husband is an elephant and will be eating different trees. I did not have to answer. My grandmother said, no problem. He must also understand that other elephants will come and eat from the same tree. Thank you.
So it really shows the power of norms and language and how that can really mold and shape a family, right? And I am cognizant of time, but I'd just like to finally wrap up this session by just alluding to the most powerful thing that was shared here.
My apology, just one thing.
Yeah, so sure.
The Minister of Menopause.
Yes.
I want to endorse that. Because one of the challenges is, I had a complete sterilization in 2015. But in my work, you find that it's an emergency. And women will be like, but I'm going to be cold. They said sexually I'm going to be dry. And so the list goes on. And what she said is very important. Because sometimes as women, which we reflect to our girls, is when you don't have a vagina, when you don't a womb, when you don't have when you don't menstruate, you've become a man. And trust me when I say sex has never been this amazing.
Listen, if we see a news article tomorrow from Deputy Minister saying sex is, listen, we know the context. Please defend her, okay? We know the context. This has been such an incredible conversation. And I think what is really important to understand is that these are topics that affect us directly. In as much as we are looking at the data, we know people who are struggling from a month-to-month basis, whether it be menstruation, whether it be menopause, whether it be puberty, whether it be violence, whether it be FGM. We know people who are experiencing this type of systematic barriers, right? And I think what is really important for me out of this session, what I've learned, is the importance of language. Because language can really mold or shape the future of a family, right? It can really determine how families then pass down these norms to their girl child who's just about to be a bride, right? And eradicating those notions of, let's remove this issue of, men are allowed to cheat and women can't. Let's remove that, right? But I think for me, what's really important, especially in the space of menstruation, is when we think of period products, Let's refrain from calling it sanitary tiles, because sanitary implies something needs to be clean. And menstruation is a natural biological function. There's nothing dirty about it, right? So let's call it a pad. Let's call it a reusable pad. Let's call it a menstrual cup. You call it a tampon. But the only way we do that is through having the education, through having these conversations. So in ending this panel, it's probably going to be the most energetic way to end a panel. I'd really like for us to make a pledge to ourselves, right? So I want you to repeat after me, right? I pledge to talk openly about sexual and reproductive health, so no one feels embarrassed about it. Louder. I pledge to talk openly about sexual and reproductive health, so no one feels embarrassed about it. And before we go and get food, I love to do this meditation exercise with a lot of participants. So I want us to close our eyes. All right, close your eyes. I promise we're not going to steal phones. Nothing's going to happen here. All right, breathe in, breathe out. Breathe in, breathe out. All right, with your eyes still closed, and the next breathe out, we're going to use the power of language by saying this powerful, magical word. It's not money, it's not chalete, it's not please, it is vagina. All right, so breathe in. Breathe out, vagina. Let's go. Breathe in. Breathe out, vagina. Let's go. Breathe in. Breathe out, vagina. Thank you so much. Now, we are requested to take a picture with the panelists here. Sis Beryl, I'd just like to thank you for your participation. We're still going to take a picture with you. For everyone in this room, thank you so much. Please be sure to, actually, I don't know if we all do have social media, LinkedIn. Please follow the work. Ensure that you are keeping up to date. I know that the Department of Social Development does have Twitter, Minister of Menstruation here on all platforms. Have a good lunch and let's network.
Plato said, "Who will guard the guardians? Who are our guardians? Do they care about us? Are they accountable for their actions, or are they above the law? Who elects these guardians? Us? Them? Someone else? And if they guard us, who will guard them? Who will guard the guardians? The Malin Guardian, if you really want to know."